This is just to show how I would go about making a new card template. So I've got my blank field. Now the dimensions of this field, 1495 by 232 pixels, is exactly the card size for a make playing cards mpc.com file that's going to contain the dimensions of a standard card inside. So the first thing I start with in this sort of project is this bleed area here. I have it as just a black field, and to fill that in, usually I just start by drawing a rectangle. Well, I start with the canvas size as my desired size, and then I will, select. W is my magic wand, so I'll just select everything, and then I will fill it with color, whatever color I want. Okay. Now, to make this part, so I'll just deselect that. To make this part, which has actually got an effect applied, so I'll turn that off. To make this blank rectangle, basically what I think I remember doing was using the rectangle tool, or maybe the rounded rectangle tool. Yeah, that sounds about right. And I think I started by importing a card I already had, but I probably wouldn't do this from scratch now. I would get an existing card and I would position it until it was in the right spot, more or less. And I've already got these files set up so that I have relative areas already measurable. So honestly, I would start from there. I would start from someone else's work here. The complication I had was that nobody had made one that was for make playing cards size. So I took an original card and I just added the bleed area. Okay. So I would basically start with a blank shape like this that you could make in any way. And you can see here, it is just a flat color. If I use the color sampler and look at this, this is where it is on the color gradient and so on. And you can play around with it, of course. And the tool I use to do this is the paintbrush, and I have the brush set to the maximum brush size so that it just covers everything in one click. And that's just because I'm lazy. So going back, this is where it is. Then I would start to think about what my other portions of the card are going to be. So, for example, a text box is pretty standard. So I put in a text box, and as you can see again, it's just a rectangle. Use the rectangle draw tool and draw a rectangle. You can change the fill with this sort of control. Okay, and it's not really too challenging, that side of things. This has no effects applied. As soon as I've placed it, it's there. And I'm going to delete it because I don't want it. But say it was going to be your, like an element of your card. Say that you were going to draw an element of your card up here and it was going to be the title box. Let's do something like that. Okay. You would tweak it around, obviously, to suit your taste and where you want it. But some basic things you can do with it, which is where the fun starts, is you can add a texture. So I've got here a texture of some scratched metal, and all I did to find that was I literally just opened a Google window and I said, scratch metal texture, right? And you'll find all this kind of thing. And you just want something that looks nice, like this one. This one doesn't look like it's got great resolution. A lot of them aren't free. Whoops, don't want that. A lot of them aren't free, so be careful. But if you do find one you like, open image in new tab to isolate the image. There it is, copy image. Come back to Photoshop, Control V, there it is. And I'm going to put it as an overlay. I'm just going to transform it like that. Okay, I'm going to put it as an overlay. I'll turn this old one off. I'm going to put it as an overlay here. Now it's here and it's already, let's release that. The command you want is create clipping mask. So you right click on it and there you go. It's clipped in with that. But it looks really flat and really weird. So first thing is to double click on the metal texture we just put in and change it to overlay blend mode. And now it's the same color as the underlying box. So all we need to do here, if we want to change the color, is I use W Magic Wand. I just need to rasterize this first so I can interact with it. You make sure you do that sometimes if you're getting an error. I select it with Magic Wand. I press B for paintbrush. I open up my colors. I go, okay, I want this to be like a dull green. So I'm going to come here and fill it. Or maybe over here a bit of a better color, yeah, some more gray. Okay, close that. Now, it doesn't look that great because it doesn't have any edges and it doesn't have any like shadows or anything like that. So I'm going to use the FX command down the bottom here. One of the best ones for this is bevel and emboss. So let's click on that and you can see automatically it starts with something nice looking. So we've got an inner bevel. We want the depth around 300, 350 for a nice sharp edge. We probably want to increase or decrease the size according to taste. That's looking better there. That's nice. And soften, not necessarily. You can play around. It's up to taste. So I would have the soften pretty much off personally. You can play around with other settings, but I think that looks all right. There's the angle of the shading, so you can make it so it's less shiny on this side and that kind of thing. Now another thing that we should think about that would look really cool is a shadow. So we're going to add a drop shadow in the same way. We want the shadow to be not so harsh, so less opaque. So maybe 60%. We might change the angle of the shadow. You can play around with that. I like a traditional shadow here in the bottom right, and then distance is probably the one that'll get the most dramatic change. You can see here you can change the distance of the shadow. If you want it to be visible, the overlap, you can make it longer distance. If you want it to just be subtle, you can make it a shorter distance. The size, again, will disperse the shadow a little bit and make it look a bit natural, a bit more natural. So that's probably good to my taste, although it does pop out the top a little bit. So you could play with the angle control. That's okay. All right, let's call that for now. So there's one way to do a shape, and another way to make it interesting would be to add another shape inside the shape. So I'll come here. I'm going to click on the layer I want this to go up above. So I don't want to add it in here because there's a clipping mask. And actually it should be, I'll click on this layer. I don't want to click here because it will insert it in between the mask and that. Later on I'll bounce these down so that they won't interact, but for now I'm going to draw my rectangle. I'm going to call this is going to be where my text is. So if I was making a card like a sci-fi game or something, I might have like some symbols in those gaps that I'm leaving there, as you can see. So there it goes there. There's a new rectangle. I'm going to keep the color the same because I want to do something, I want to make it look like it's one object. I'm going to rasterize it again so that I can interact with it. Select it. Actually, I'm happy with it like that. So now it's time to add a texture. I'm actually going to continue the same texture. So what I'll do is I'll grab that metal texture that we used before and duplicate it. Don't care what it's called. I'm going to move it above the layer I just made. It's an overlay, but I need to put it as a clipping mask so it only clips that object. And that object has just gone invisible because the overlay is the same. So it's looking like, and it's the same color. So to differentiate it, I'm going to go effects and I'm going to go inner shadow, and this is where it's going to look cool. So you can see here it's now sunk in, it looks etched into the metal, and I can now play with that. So I can make it more opaque so it's more dramatic, and I can also increase the distance of the shadow. And if I don't want it just on that angle, instead of doing a shadow, I can change it here and do an inner glow, and that's probably more effective. So an inner glow is going to do pretty much the same thing, but all around in an even way. And you can see now that looks awesome. That's starting to look like a proper texture. And another thing you could do is you could even add an outer bevel, right? An outer bevel here, and you could lower the depth so it's just a little bit, and it looks like it's kind of been beaten or something, or maybe you play around, right? I don't know exactly what's going to look right on this one for you. You could add a stroke. A stroke is just an outline. This is a really powerful tool I use a lot. You can actually see adding a stroke here really makes it stick out starkly. You could add an inner shadow to make it more dramatic on one side. Okay, let's call that done there. Now, one other thing is that I think that if this was set in to this other piece, it wouldn't look as clean as the same color. So I'm actually going to select it using the magic wand again. I've got it at tolerance 100, so it automatically selects everything. And then if I go to my color picker again, I'm in the same color, and I'm just going to darken it a little bit. Switch to my paintbrush, color it, and there, deselect. It looks a little bit better there. So this is a whole part of the creative process, is deciding how you want to use these shapes to make your card frame. And this is how I do it. So I've got the texture overlay, I've got the inner bevel for a card frame element, I've got inner glow for an element within an element. You've got different colors, and you can also play around with different textures. Maybe I want to, instead of using this metal, so I'll turn off that overlay, I want to use the other metal, this one from the original card that I started with. So I'm going to create a clipping mask just on this one, and you can see the texture's different, and I can select the texture layer and move it around so I get the best part of the texture. Double click, and then here, but now it looks too dark because this was a darker metal, so I select my rectangle again, I come back to the color palette, I brighten it up, I color it in. That looks a little bit better, but not quite right there, right? So playing around with that, deselect, that's better. I don't like the texture much, but you can see how you could potentially use this. You can use gravel, sand, stone, all kinds of different textures to get interesting effects for card frames. And I think I'll leave it there because that's pretty much the fundamentals of it. If you look at the stuff I did for the Middle Earth cards, this is the text box, and if I enable the bevel and emboss, you can see that there, and then if I enable the texture, you can see the texture on it, and then if you want the prowess and body thing, you can see that that's just a circle shape with this ellipse tool. It's just a circle, but it's cut off around the card frame. And then within that, I've got a texture. So I've got like a stucco sort of texture on it. And that's pretty much the same for these ones too, for the marshalling points and stuff like that. So it's really pretty straightforward once you get down how it works, and you have unlimited creative tools.